We are super fortunate this morning to start our Fireside chat with world-renowned architect Dr. Patrik Schumacher, who is currently the principal of Zaha Hadid Architects, a very prestigious architecture firm with a whole range of award-winning projects under the belt. So very exciting to have him here with us today. And beyond heading Zaha Hadid Architects, he is also a very respected academic, having taught and currently still teaching in numerous architecture schools around the world, including the AA in London and Harvard University in the US. He is also more than just an architect. He is currently a thought leader in the field. He's contributed groundbreaking ideas to the architectural and urban planning discourse, including the concept of a market-based urban order. And he is a supporter of the Free Cities movement, as evident by some of the very interesting projects that Zaha Hadid Architects have done in Praxis, in Prospera, and in Liberland, which we saw yesterday. So in the next 20 minutes, we will ask a lot of questions about his thoughts on planning systems, building regulations, and prescriptive housing standards. So I would love to open up this discussion with a very general question in the beginning, which is, what are your thoughts on the Free Cities movement?
Yeah, I love it, and I understand the rationale. Liberty in our lifetime. My worry has been that starting afresh in remote locations is a huge kind of setback initially. And the question is, how quickly can you build up critical mass and create vibrant places? But I think there's been the COVID experience and the remote working bonanza, and where we all have been working for years totally remotely, is a huge boon, and for me it increased the credibility of this concept by orders of magnitude. So I'm much more optimistic now.
That's great to hear. I mean, you created a very interesting urban planning concept for Liberland, which is, I think, an idea that hasn't really been discussed widely in urban planning. And you recommend three very distinctive approaches called sponsored order, self-governed order, and spontaneous order. Could you tell us exactly what they are and how they're kind of different from conventional planning system in the world?
So yeah, the first thing I wanted to say, that I have the idea that when you start out, you don't know yet what your market would desire in terms of degree of regulation, degree of anticipation, let's say, of what will come, and degrees of freedom. So the idea here was that to start with several approaches simultaneously in different zones, and then see how they work, and then let one expand over the other and withdraw and convert one into the other. So there's a kind of market testing. And the idea of a sponsored order, there's actually three subcategories. One is anticipated, where you literally develop a full master plan and vision plan where people can see what the city will be like, and when they buy something, they know exactly in which context they buy it. The difficulty here is that you actually then have to have so much development pressure that you can actually fulfill and realize that, and so this will be quite prescriptive. Another way of sponsoring and giving more, let's say, secure vision would be to have very strict rules within which then individual choices and degrees of freedom can still operate, or you have a kind of curatorial board you trust of who would manage the adaptation to new conditions, but you would rely on sensibly fulfilling a vision which is maybe more abstractly formulated. This is all quite traditional, but I thought then on the other extreme is that kind of free-for-all spontaneous order where you just say, here's land, buy a small part, a huge part, and do whatever you like with it. The difficulty is you don't know. I mean, that's great in many ways, but it's not for everybody's taste because you wouldn't know what's happening around you. And and then in between these two is what I call the self-organized order, as where you say we have people who buy land, maybe with a basic set of rules. They then you devolve to them, to the landowners, to form associations to then self-govern the further adaptation. For those who've bought collectively in that region could then write rules. Of course, then you have transaction cost issues. And I would initially, what I thought you from the center in a series of rings outwards, the way I would order these, but with the openness to discover which of these regimes gets buy-in, and to then kind of allow that, and what experience you make finally also with really building them out to see whether you expand the territory and scope of one or the other regime. Yeah.
Okay. And then how would you say are some of the drawbacks that's associated with the current planning system, which doesn't do any of the orders that you mentioned?
Well, we have actually planning paralysis in a lot of major cities. There is really very little development in an era where a particular vibrant cities like London, where I live, there's a lot of pressure. People want to come there, participate in this fantastic place, a lot of work opportunity, business opportunities, but really the planning system and the restriction of supply but also is a huge barrier because it increases prices to a point where a lot of young professionals or young families have to make the hard choice whether they would stay away in the provinces or in the far suburbs and compromise their career possibilities, or they come in and really have to give away 80% of their income to be part of that network and live in, let's say, materially very poor conditions. And that's a huge problem. The other big problem is in terms of developing vibrant creative industry clusters, for instance. What I think is a huge problem in the current city system is that you have land use plans and planning systems which don't allow to a free allocation of parcels to users, and also don't allow the kind of to let the density emerge relative to locational desires. And this idea of forging co-location synergies, where only the market process itself would discover who wants to be where and connected to who. That's the whole rationale of coming together in the city, because you want to be close to other players, other companies, maybe universities, certain facilities. And the land use plans prevent this because they're very antiquated and totally distort the land values as well. So that's a huge problem for, even in a city like London. Okay, we're coming together, but we don't come together close enough because we have to stick to these land use plans, and also the density is highly restrictive. So it's not only quantity of supply, but it is the where exactly locate and which uses go where, in what degrees of density, which is totally, in a sense, paralyzed, totally paralyzed. And I want to say one more thing, because this is incredibly important also for quality of life. It makes, I mean, if you think about what defines the quality of your life in a relatively affluent society, where it doesn't make sense to have a third car or eat 5 steaks or have another 5 suits in your cupboard. The main thing is where you live and what kind of place you can have and afford, and that's what you spend all your money on, and it's the only motivation for you to earn more, to get a better, nicer location and form of living. And if that market, the real estate market, is so paralyzed and made so artificially expensive, that's a huge restriction on prosperity. So you can't in a free system, you would be so much better off in terms of spending your money and not spending 80% of your salary on on an apartment. And so the prosperity boon is underestimated, which is kind of locked up in this politically constrained and paralyzed real estate market and urban development market.
Thank you very much. And I have to say, as someone who was once very young, working professional in London, I have paid the price of giving away 80% of my salary for housing, and that was very painful. So then if, for example, in a place like a free city where we do away with all these prescriptive planning regulations and minimum density requirements, how do you think we can strike a balance between the essential safety and quality standards for the people that are living there versus just shared density?
I mean, the safety standard is not something I'm arguing much with. I mean, that would also be in a private city. You would, for instance, fire safety. It is also an externality. If you have an inflammable building, you're a hazard to everybody around. So there's basics. That's really not the issue. What needs to be developed is the degrees of freedom to have that formation of co-location clusters where only the participants know where they want to locate their business and which site, if you're a developer, you want to tease out which uses you want to bring to the site to increase the value of that parcel so that you can make most use of the connections this parcel affords. And both of these are, I mean, this is not happening at the moment. This is the main thing which you do in a free private city. And the other one is the supply. That if this big city becomes popular, that there is a fast flow of new supply. That's the huge thing in London. I mean, there is a lot of construction in London, but it's very small compared to the enormous desire of coming in. So that if the pipeline of supply is much smaller than the pipeline of people coming in, you build up this imbalance. And you create these kind of very artificial and bad prices, which then at a certain point stop that inflow. And as I said, this is a huge issue for also an economy like the UK or for the world economy. If with all these creative people who would be most productive and flourishing their business and their careers if they could be part of these centers, in a sense, stay away. And that, I think, this is difficult to measure. I mean, as we all know, these kind of absences and failed opportunities, there's no measures for them, but I think this is a massive condition. And I think now, I think with the remote working potential, there is some of this kind of period which we had in the last 30 years where this urban concentration, moving back from the suburbs into centers, this was a huge thing. And to have the necessity to be in certain locations, to be flourishing at the top of your profession, that is maybe not so stringent anymore. And that's a great opportunity for free private cities. So I think that's fantastic, and that's why I'm interested in the metaverse, because what we discovered, that we were working remotely, we've been very productive, but it's difficult to absorb new talent. It's difficult to know what everybody else is doing and have these kind of knowledge exchanges going. So there's a drawback. It's not exactly the same. When I go through the office and I see 100 screens and quickly pick up what's going on and quickly ask them, what are you doing? I don't have the equivalent online. It's not real time, it's not there, and it's not the space of looking through lists, and it's not the same. So I think the metaverse would be the way where you have a 360-degree unfolding of information, and it's spontaneous, freely browsable. There's something similar, real-time communication. That's what I'm working on, and that would help, I think, with overcoming the need for concentrating in these kind of industry clusters. And the other thing is that they could be, cities don't have to be as huge as London. You could have the financial center by itself, or the media cluster somewhere by itself, and biotech. So you could be specialized smaller cities, and that's a great opportunity also for free private cities, which hasn't been discussed so much. I think they need to be trying to specialize on particular creative industry incubator hubs where you have critical mass of a certain, for instance, the Web3 cluster somewhere. Or if you would be a developer in a city, you can do something like a media center, not a random, anybody comes. So you generate these hubs. Then you don't have to be a huge city. You know, you could be a research and development smaller city like Cambridge, focusing on particular industries. I think there's a chance, to the extent that physical co-location is still required for free private cities.
Thank you. And then, in your opinion, is there a city that you think we could use as a model for this mixed-use range of commercialization versus being a hub for example, a technology center?
Yeah, I think something like Cambridge. I mean, if you bring a great institution, if you bring a university, and let's say you look at certain city districts, for instance, Miami becoming kind of design focused through a festival like Design Miami or art festivals, you can generate these kind of clusters which don't need to be huge, but concentrate a large part of that niche industry in a location and bring in key players. I think that's something like these smaller cities like Cambridge, or Oxford, or certain districts in, for instance, the Square Mile. The Square Mile it doesn't have to be in London, in a huge 10 million metropolis, a financial center which brings together a significant critical mass of players. I think that's something which I hadn't heard enough about in the Free Cities movement. That because this remains still, I think, very, very important, because I don't think these to be an important contributor to the overall, like a Trojan horse to develop degrees of freedom, they need to be productive places. They can't be retirement places for Bitcoin billionaires or for rentiers, inverted commas, who've made their mark and now kind of go into a tax haven. They need to be active, productive, kick-ass kind of places, and for that they need to be very strategic, in which industries they could attract and be leading.
I think we have time for one more question, so I think it's always good, even though
Should
we're
we throw
all
it
like...
out to the audience?
Or
do we might not have time, but then...
I would love to ask one more question from my side first, and then maybe we can throw it to the audience. So obviously we're in a room of very like-minded people who are very receptive to everything we're saying. So maybe it's interesting to ask something from the opposing view. So critics might express, concerns about private ownership of public spaces, such as restricted access, commercialization, loss of cultural and civic identity. And in your opinion, how do you think architects and developers can mitigate these risks within these new developing free cities?
Well, first of all, I don't think there is. I think that if you look at London, there's been so many all the private development now contribute fantastic pedestrian plazas, civic realms, and you don't even know that they're private or publicly run, but they're loved and liked. And I think the diversity of offering it will be so enriching that if we could have all the outdoor spaces, so-called publicly accessible spaces, no longer run by the public but private, I think there would be a huge increase in vibrancy, in activation, in utilization as a huge asset lying fallow, because right now they're largely underutilized, and they're kind of one-fit-all in terms of the house rules, inverted commas, they're very restrictive in many ways, and they're very kind of uniform. While if you privatize it all, you have a huge kind of diversity of populations and event structures and rules and modes of engagement and social protocols. I think would be fantastic wealth, which is totally lying fallow because the public authorities are not doing anything really productive with all the space they're holding.
Thank you very much. I think that's a great point to end our fireside chat. Do we have time for a question from the audience? Just one.
One question,
okay.
In the back there. He always kicks. Here.
I don't know if you're familiar with it, but there's a considerable body of research using hedonic modeling, so regression analysis, that shows that modern architecture creates negative externalities. So buildings that are surrounded by modern architecture are worth less. And I wonder, what do you think of that?
Yeah, I think the discipline discourse of architecture has discovered that. And this kind of period of modernism, which, by the way, coincides with the period of most state control over the built environment you've ever had in the history of the world, where you had literally investing and planning and physical execution in government hands, basically the kind of socialist and quasi-socialist model. That's where you have this phenomenon. And the urban renaissance since the Thatcher-Reagan kind of neoliberal revolution kind of coincided with, in the sense, discovering and overcoming all of that and trying to, but we're still fighting with the results of these kind of 50 years of socialist misplanning and mismanagement.
Thank you so much. Thank you.